All right, with this video, I'm picking up where I left off on the topic of post-colonial independence. But before I can get into the history of this topic, I need to take a second to take a look at what's going on currently. All right, I'm recording this in May of 2018, right in the wake of the United States uh, opening an embassy in Jerusalem, which sparked a great deal of violence in Gaza. Um, as you can see from the headlines, if you compare the headlines on the left, which are focused on people who were hurt, the Palestinians who were hurt on you know, by Israel, but then you look at the right, and then you can see, look at the different pictures, the photographs that these articles chose to use versus the photograph used in the left. Take a look at the headlines. A New York Post opinion piece arguing that Israel is simply defending itself versus the New York Times focusing on Israel killing dozens of people. The BBC asking whether Israel used excessive force when NBC is positioning Israel's actions as a defense against terrorist attacks. As you can see from the subhead about Hamas was using the border protests as a cover for terrorist attacks. Just from this quick selection of articles that I found on the internet, obviously, this is violence that's occurring right now as we speak in Israel. And to understand what's going on, you need to have some background on this area of the world and the kind of historic events that have created this violence that still continues today. In addition, from looking at these headlines, it's clear that different people and different organizations can view the same events very differently. People have very strong opinions on this. Right now, I need to talk to you about this topic because, well, first, it's important for you to, just understand, have some general historic background. That way you can view news articles and understand the historic issues that underlie a lot of the problems that you're going to see. That way you can be a more educated reader of the news. But beyond that, I mean, this is a topic that is on the Global Regents that you need to be familiar with. So I'm going to do my best to present the facts, focusing on those that are covered by the Regents. I'm going to do my best with the topic. It is certainly not my intention to offend anyone. I know people have very strong opinions on this. So I'm going to do my best to lay out the facts and really focus on those that you need to know for the Regents. I hope I do a good job. And if I offend anyone, truly, it is not my intention. So I'm just going to do my best. All right, first things first. When we want to talk about Israel, you need to have some background about the Jewish experience throughout global history. One issue that comes up is some people think of Judaism just simply as a religion, but it's really more than that. Judaism can also be thought of, being Hebrew, can also be thought of as an ethnicity. If you guys remember from 9th grade when we talked about Mesopotamia, that area in the Middle East, you should remember that Judaism comes out of that area, that it is founded by the Hebrews who had a civilization in Mesopotamia. And when that civilization fell, a lot of the people from that area moved throughout the world, bringing their religion, their traditions with them. And so what you end up with is basically a nation that no longer has a homeland. So what does it mean to be a nation? Again, the definition of a nation is a people who share traditions and a culture, language, religion, and so on and so forth. And that certainly holds true for people who are Jewish, whether you are a Jewish person who comes from France or South America or Russia, wherever in the world you are, there are going to be certain things that Jewish people are going to have in common, even though they don't have a country of their own. They had shared this culture, this feeling of being a nation. So As I said, with these Jewish people spread throughout the world, they were traditionally a minority group and basically a persecuted minority group. And we see many, many instances of that in global history. Your global history class, it's going to include the pogroms in Russia, it's, the Spanish, the expulsion in Spain, and so on and so forth, and many other um, periods of anti-Semitism, even those that aren't covered in the global curriculum. And actually, that's an important word for me to define, is anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism means discrimination specifically applied to Jewish people, people of the Jewish faith. So as I said, this is a minority group that is subject to a tremendous amount of prejudice, of anti-Semitism. And basically, in the wake of World War I, there was an event in Europe. I'm not going to go into detail because you don't need to know it for the regions. But suffice to say, there was a wave of anti-Semitism in Europe, and as a result, there started to be this movement of people who said that Jewish people needed to have their own homeland, that they should return to the Middle East, the area where, as a people, they had once had their homeland, that they had this historic tie to this land in the Middle East, and they should return to Zion. And Zion is another word for Jerusalem. And this movement for Jewish people to move back to Jerusalem and establish a homeland for Jewish people is called Zionism. And Zionism, people believed in Zionism because there was a belief that Jewish people were being persecuted, they were subject to discrimination, they were subject to anti-Semitism, and if they had their own homeland, this would give them a place of safety, of security, where they could kind of build their own culture again. All right, so what happens is that this Zionist movement starts, but really what gives it a lot more strength is when Britain issues the Balfour Declaration. Balfour Declaration is where Britain says that it would support the creation of a Jewish homeland in Palestine. And what's important about Britain's support of this is that the area of Palestine is one that is a protectorate of Britain. It was a British protectorate. Now, if you don't remember what a protectorate is, you should go back and rewatch the imperialism PowerPoint, okay, the imperialism video. Because that was it. This was an area of the world that was under British control, all right? So as a result of the Balfour Declaration, Jewish people start moving to Palestine, to this area in the Middle East. And even more so as you start to see Hitler's rise to power. So in the days leading up to World War II and throughout World War II, more and more Jewish people start moving to Palestine on the basis of this Balfour Declaration. And then in 1947, so right in the wake of the world kind of coming to grips with the horror that the Jewish people had experienced in the Holocaust, the United Nations says they support this idea of creating a homeland for Jewish people in Palestine. And the United Nations wants to partition, so split apart Palestine, to have one area reserved for Palestinian people and one area reserved to become the nation of Israel, a homeland for the Jews. As you might imagine, the Palestinians, who had considered this entire area their own homeland, were very upset with this plan. They did not like it, and they did not agree to it. So as a result, the UN partition plan is rejected, and what we end up with is a series of 4 major wars fought between Israel and the Arab nations that support the Palestinian people. As you can see on the top left, this is like a political cartoon, right, from kind of an Arabic newspaper. And one of the things, we're going to talk a little bit later in this presentation about some of the nations of the Middle East, but there are certain things that not all Islamic countries get along, okay? For a number of different reasons. One of the big ones is the split between the Sunni and the Shia, but I don't want to jump ahead. But suffice to say, different Islamic nations have numerous reasons why they can come into conflict with each other. But the one thing that all of these Islamic nations agree on is basically their hatred for Israel. It's the one thing that really ties them together, that bonds them together, is that they all resent this presence of Israel, and they support the Palestinian people. If you look at the bottom left, so as you can see from the map, in the left, that's the map where, as I said, Jewish people started to migrate to the area of Palestine in the wake of the Balfour Declaration. And then you can see, and especially after World War II, the next picture is the UN partition plan and what it would have looked like, the section for Israel and the section given to Palestinians. Since the Palestinians had rejected that plan, as I said, there were 4 major wars. The 2 that come up the most on the regions that you should be familiar with the names are the Sinai War and the 6-Day War. And as you can read, Israel wins every war. So as a result, the Palestinians lose more and more land due to their losses at war. And that leads us to the next picture. And ever since, again, up till this map on the right is from 2011. But if we were to look at a 2018 map, the Palestinian areas would be even smaller. So today, the areas where there is the most violence, where there is the most conflict is, as it notes, the West Bank, the Golan Heights, and Gaza Strip. And of course, Gaza is where the current violence kind of broke out. As it notes, Hamas is considered by the vast majority of the world as a terrorist organization. They have said straight out their goal is to destroy Israel. They want it gone. They support violence against Israel. What happens is in areas that are under Palestinian control and the Palestinian Authority, in those areas, the Palestinian people have elected Hamas to lead the Palestinian government. So although the Palestinians may view them as a political organization, as I said, the majority of the world views them as a terrorist organization. One of the other issues really complicating this whole issue is the fact that Israel is a major United States ally. I mean, like best friends, BFFs for life. We really depend on Israel. The Middle East is a part of the world that is of strategic and economic and critical importance in the world. And Israel is the one ally that we can really depend on. And especially today, in wake of the war on terror, having access, having a positive relationship with Israel really helps us kind of develop strategies and get information about what's going on in that area of the world. So the United States strongly supports Israel. By the same token, a lot of other countries have much more sympathy for the Palestinians. In fact, the United Nations generally, its statements have been much more pro-Palestine. So it's certainly a conflict. As I said, there's many different sides. It's a very complex topic. So it's really something that you need to look in the news, discuss it with your friends, discuss it with your families, and you can draw your own conclusions. All right? All right, from the formation of Israel, we're going to move on to the Iranian Revolution. So the Iranian Revolution begins, Iran was controlled had a prime minister. The head of the government was Prime Minister Mossadegh, all right? And he was democratically elected. And at the time of his election, Iran was basically had a positive relationship with the United States. We had many investments in the country, specifically our oil companies did a lot of work there. And the country itself was pretty pro-Western. If you had looked at photographs from the time period, women wore mini skirts and their hair was uncovered and they kind of dressed in kind of typical Western fashions. But a break in our relationship with Iran really starts with Mossadegh calling for the nationalization of Iran's oil fields. Now, what does nationalization mean? We talked about it in the earlier video when it came to Nasser in Egypt, talking about nationalizing the Suez Canal. And what that means is that if there is a very valuable resource that's owned by foreigners, the country, in this case Iran, has oil fields. The oil fields are located in Iran, but these oil fields predominantly serve the interests of foreign companies, foreign governments. So Iran's oil fields had British petroleum, so British companies as well as United States companies drew the majority of the wealth from Iran's oil fields. So nationalization would be if Iran took back all of those oil fields and using it to enrich its own country. As you might imagine, this strategy did not sit well with the United States. So the United States, specifically the CIA, gave financial support to allow for a coup. That means a military overthrow of Mossadegh. We basically helped remove him from power, and we installed the Shah of Iran as the leader of Iran's government. Now, the Shah of Iran, you can kind of think of Shah as a king, a leader with basically all-powerful kind of leader. He ends up becoming the head of Iran's government. And once he becomes this dictator, again, it's a very repressive society. He has a secret police. The people lose. As I said, before this, they were a democratic government. Now they are not. So they lose a lot of political power. However, the Shah does support Westernization, and he does want a secular, so secular means not religious, government. So, for example, women have the right to vote under his government. However, there is severe wealth inequality, and the Shah's government is considered utterly corrupt and certainly under the influence of the United States, since, of course, the United States had helped put him into power. The Shah had very strong, very close relationships with the United States. The problem is, although the United States loved the Shah, the people really didn't. The middle class people resented the fact that they went from a democratic government to having a dictatorship where they lost their voice in government. So that was an issue for a big portion of the population. But there was also a conservative part of the population who resented the westernization of the Shah's government. They resented this pull away from Islam, from the teachings of Muhammad. They didn't want to see this, and they resented this kind of westernization of their country. So these two groups ended up uniting in their mutual hatred for the Shah. And as a result, that's what leads to the Iranian Revolution, which is a very violent revolution. There's many protests and so on in the street. And the Iranian Revolution is successful. The Shah falls from power, and he is replaced by the Ayatollah Khomeini. The Ayatollah Khomeini is a religious leader who now not only is a leader, an Islamic leader, not only a religious leader, but now he also is the head of the Iranian government. So the government of Iran goes from being a secular, which means not religious government, to now it becomes an Islamic state, basically. So that means that Islamic rules, so the rules that come from the Quran, are now used to develop rules for the country. Right? There is no separation of church and state. The church and the state are one. And that's known as a theocracy. So today, when you look at Iran, Iran is really what we would consider more of a fundamentalist, Islamic fundamentalist society, that a more strict reading of Islam is enforced by law. So for example, in the United States, some women who are Muslim choose to wear a hijab to cover their hair. By the same token, you can meet Muslim women who do not wear the hijab, and that's their choice. However, in Iran, there is no choice. Women must keep their hair covered at all times. They must wear conservative clothing that keeps their body covered. If they do not, they will get arrested. In addition, there are jobs and access to education is much more limited to women. They are allowed to vote, but generally speaking, their ability to they certainly, the women of Iran have many fewer rights than the women in, for example, the United States or other Western nations. There's a group even known as the mullahs. These are spiritual enforcers. So these are literally like a police force that makes sure that you are obeying the laws of Islam that are now the laws of Iran. Just one last thing. So once the Ayatollah has taken power, obviously there's still a lot of anger towards the Shah. There's a desire for the Iranian people to have him come home and to be prosecuted for his crimes against the Iranian people. And what ends up happening is the Shah develops cancer, and he comes to the United States to get treatment. And the people of Iran demand the return of the Shah to Iran so that he can face charges, but the United States will not do that. We don't let the Shah go. We consider him an ally. We're going to protect him. So we allow the Shah to come to the United States for his cancer treatments. As a result of that decision, a number of U.S. embassy workers are taken hostage, and they are held for 14 months. And this was known as the Iran hostage crisis. And as you can see, that was from 1979 to 1980. And that event, of course, naturally soured the relations between U.S. and Iran even further. Today in the news, the latest information, our latest relationship with Iran basically is focused on the Iran nuclear deal. Under President Obama, we had made an agreement with Iran that if they stopped the development of nuclear weapons, there would be much more economic opportunity and trade with them. President Trump decided that he wanted to stop that deal. He wanted to pull out of that deal. So as a result, the resentment, kind of hatred within Iran towards the United States is, of course, heightened, and they are threatening, Iran is currently threatening to restart their nuclear program, which will have serious repercussions, or at least potential repercussions, for the United States and the rest of the world. I'm going to take a break now. Please come back for Post-Colonial Part 3.